Communism isn't what it seems on the surface. How do secret societies have anything to do directly with communism? We'll introduce the missing puzzle piece. Is anything ever really that simple? Weishaupt's methods of secrecy and deception were well beyond anything we've ever seen. Where did communism first come from?
Hey everyone, welcome to Edge of Wonder. This is part 2 of our communism series, Communism and Illuminism. Many of you have been asking us about Adam Weishaupt and how he relates to the Illumidonkey. Others have been asking us whether the Freemasons are good or bad. We've also gotten many questions about the Knights Templar and how they fit into the entire equation.
Well everyone, hold on to your hats, because in this episode we're going to show you the hidden history of secret societies and this New World Order, only told through the formation of communism. Man, who would have thought?
Now, often when people talk about communism, they think it was just some Russian thing that's no longer a threat. For some people, they might think it has to do with some kind of revolution, or they might know that China is still a communist country and that Mao Zedong starved a lot of people and was a nut job.
When they dig a little further, they might start to learn about the French Revolution and just think that communism came about because of a bunch of surface philosophies and philosophers, which, I mean, you can hardly call them that, came about because France legitimately needed reform.
Is anything ever really that simple? Can you think of any huge change that wasn't impacted or is not a result of many different factors all intersecting at once? Simply think about how complicated it is when a war starts and all the events that lead up to it.
While researching communism, we found a very buried source. An academic researcher and author named Nesta Webster, who could really be considered the great-grandmother of all conspiracy theorists. Or conspiracy realists, as I heard someone say.
That's true.
The book is called World Revolution: The Plot Against Civilization.
Webster predates Fritz Springmeier by 80 years, at a time when using the phrase conspiracy theorist wasn't a trigger word to get you to automatically reject anything someone says.
This lady was exposing the Illumidonkey when Fritz Springmeier wasn't even a twinkle in his grandmother's eyes. And as we read, we were dumbfounded by her research.
Her work is so sourced that it's impossible to deny her findings. She read the actual original documents and personal letters of those behind these movements from both France and Germany, tracking back the genesis of every secret society and everything that's changed our world and why today is how it is. You guys excited? So are we.
We found it strange that this source would just be sitting there without any drama behind it, so we decided to look into the person, and lo and behold, there was drama. We found out that she's currently known in the academic circles as a Nazi sympathizer. This claim on her reputation was so serious, for the most part, all her works have been rejected in current studies.
But, as we stated in our last episode, we found that Hitler may in fact have been of the Rothschild bloodline, making this situation much more involved than we thought. And as we've seen with people like author Cotton Mather and many others, these things are complicated and should be looked at both historically and from a third-party perspective, taking emotion completely out of the equation.
Why do we say that? Her work largely took place before Hitler's genocide. She was so good at researching that she was an informant to both British and American intelligence agencies. Several quotes from top officials of the time can be found about her.
So we decided to read on and see what Nesta found and try to figure out the situation for ourselves. We've now read several works from Nesta Webster, and we're baffled at finding that she was very against entities undermining mankind, particularly those of communism, and there isn't even an inkling of hate towards anything but those entities that seem to be undermining humans.
However, in her findings, Nesta made a grave oversight. She found that people who called themselves Jews were behind several subversive movements. Because of that, she confused these people who called themselves Jews as actual Jews.
She ended up joining societies that considered themselves fascist before those fascist societies are considered what they are today. But it's also extremely doubtful she would consider herself a fascist in today's day and age after seeing the way history played out.
She was fooled by Hitler, as were many other people of the time, and thought he understood what she did. So she even defended him at certain points. And then when Hitler did what he did, unfortunately, the damage was done.
People now consider her a fascist, but what's strange, as we stated in our last episode, she was against what communism, the most murderous specter on the planet, was doing.
She was against these things and people being undermined. So this is a very complicated situation.
So, by reading her books, are Ben and I fascist? Hell no. Every race and every person on the planet was literally created by the divine. We have nothing but love for everyone.
However, what she found was so mind-blowing that we as a people have to take a look at it and consider it. So let's once again put down what history has said and take a look at this for ourselves and see if we can uncover the truth behind the secret societies and communism.
Yeah, let's think for ourselves instead of listening to a talking head. What a concept.
What is communism and where did it come from?
In multiple sources that we've looked through, including the Epoch Times specter of communism, it is said that the seeds of communism could be traced back to ancient Greek philosophers of our civilization. Not all of them, of course, but some of them.
There was then a long time between that and when things started to flare up in recent times. To track all of this, you have to look at what happened in Europe, particularly in France, leading up to the French Revolution.
In 1185, there was a movement called the Confrérie de la Paix, which translates to the Fellowship of the Peace. They attacked nobles and clergy and focused on setting up a community of land. Their belief system was called nationalization.
This confrérie led to something called the Albigeois, who in 1250 used the same theory to also attack nobles and priests. Sounds like a common theme, right? And keep in mind that these things happen in France, where there was a clear distinction between nobles and common folk.
Coincidentally, and also in 1250, an order of knights was founded in Jerusalem called the Knights Templars. After the Crusades, when the Templars returned to France, they positioned themselves as independent to the French monarchy under the leader Jacques du Molay.
This power was at odds with the king of the time, King Philippe le Bel, and in October of 1307, on Friday the 13th, several of these Templars were arrested and accused of spitting on crucifixes, denying Christ through various means, and of course, accused of worshiping Baphomet.
Several of these Knights Templar were executed, including the Grand Master of the Templars, Molay. This might seem like a random thing to share here, but according to this version of the story, one that's been tracked back, we're looking at the genesis of none other than the Freemasons.
Nestus says,
according to the Chevalier du Molay, those Templars who had escaped the storm afterwards met in obscurity so as to reknit the ties that had united them, and in order to avoid fresh denunciations, they made use of allegorical methods which indicated the basis of their association in a manner unintelligible to the eyes of the vulgar. That is the origin of the Freemasons.
In our episode, we're going to call these the French Freemasons, because there was an apparent divide between those French Freemasons in France and those in Britain, which had developed in a very different way.
the British Freemasons actually developed from a real guild of Masons, and there was a spirit of brotherhood and benevolence, seen also in the early years of the Americas. Freemasonry has many lodges, so it's easy to see how lodges, especially lodges in different countries, could develop in different ways.
The British Freemasonry had a stringent set of principles that were always followed of, quote, nothing touching religion or government shall ever be spoken of in the lodge, unquote.
The details of Freemasonry development are a little outside the scope of this discussion, but we're trying to give everyone what they need in relation to this episode.
French Freemasonry really is one of the keys in this whole dialogue. There was a sect of the French Freemasons founded in the 1700s called the Grand Chapter.
The Grand Chapter, all these years later, were still fueled by the desire to avenge their executed leader, Jacques du Molay. targeting the two entities that cause these executions, royalty and the papacy.
The Grand Chapter, which were also Freemasons, created a pact with another secret society at the time called the Grand Orient.
Webster had this to say.
The Grand Orient began a coalition with the Grand Chapter in 1786, which acquired a far more dangerous character. For whilst the spirit of the Grand Orient was frankly democratic, though not demagogic, the spirit of the Grand Chapter was revolutionary. But the revolution was to be accomplished above all for the benefit of the upper class, la haute bourgeoisie, with the people as its instrument.
Now, there is one more peripheral secret society of the time. Before we get to the most important one, that's necessary to mention, and bear with us because all of this is going to start making sense very soon.
A group called the Fraternities, or Martinism, also was founded in Portugal in 1754 by a man named Martins Pasquale. This group came about and combined Gnosticism and what's called Judaized Christianity. How all of these existed together is beyond us. What is interesting is that this group was often referred to in French records as Luminaires, which strangely sounds similar to another group, but these should not at all be confused.
And now we'll introduce the missing puzzle piece, the thing everyone's been waiting to hear about, the Bavarian Illuminati.
It is by this terrible and formidable sect that the gigantic plan of world revolution was worked out under the leadership of the man whom Louis Blanc, who by the way was a socialist historian, has truly described as the profoundest conspirator that has ever existed.
Drum roll, please.
Adam Weishaupt.
Boom. Well, wait, stop the record. That quote said world revolution. Who was Adam Weishaupt?
150 years in the making. The ultimate evil specter. Lies, hatred, and struggle. Traditions destroyed. The deep state's cult, communism.
Adam Weishaupt was born on February 6, 1748. He got involved in Jesuit institutions by a very young age, and it inspired him with a violent dislike for their order. After which he found solace in the teachings from the French philosophers and anti-Christian doctrines at that time.
There's another important piece to this puzzle given in the account of Webster.
It is said that he was also indoctrinated into Egyptian occultism by a certain merchant of unknown origin from Jutland named Comer, who was traveling about Europe during the year 1771 in search of adepts.
It was on this day of May 1st, 1776, after 5 years of contemplation and planning, the Illuminati was formed.
The significance of this particular day cannot be overlooked. Fritz Springmeier says in Bloodlines of the Illuminati,
In witchcraft and Satanism, Lucifer, Baal, rises from the underworld on May 1st, also known by the following list of names: Beltane, a major European holiday, communism and the Illuminati's chief holiday, and Walpurgis.
There's much more he says about sex rituals and other messed up stuff, but we should mention that this is not just Fritz talking about this. There are multiple academic sources that talk about the meaning of May 1st in these occult practices. Is it a coincidence that Weishaupt picked this day to start the Illuminati?
come on guys. He organized this society by combining the degrees of Freemasons with those of the Jesuits. And even though he hated the Jesuits, he also saw the strengths of their ways and weaved them into the inverse for the destruction of everything they built. Weishaupt is even quoted as saying,
What all these men have done for altars and empires, why should I not do against altars and empires? By the attraction of mysteries, of legends, of adepts, why should I not destroy in the dark what they erect in the light of day?
When first Weishaupt could not succeed in convincing ex-Jesuits to join, he spited them and made rules that they and Jews could not be allowed in save for by special permission.
Weishaupt's methods of secrecy and deception were well beyond anything ever seen. Only what a person could accept would be revealed, and that which could not be accepted was reworded to fit into that person's line of thinking. In fact, Weissepp's favorite maxim was, the end justifies the means.
If someone was a Christian, for instance, Christ was represented as the first author of Illuminism, whose real teaching was liberty and equality, right?
Good behavior over time was rewarded by being let in on higher secrets in the order, and these secrets must have been intriguing enough to allow for amassing new members.
You might be asking, what were Weissepp's plans and secrets to revolutionize the world? While some of them seem like they could have been mystical, the revolutionary goals can be summed up into these 6 points.
1. Abolition of monarchy and all ordered government. 2. Abolition of private property. 3. Abolition of inheritance. 4. Abolition of patriotism. 5. Abolition of the family, i.e. of marriage and all morality, and the institution of the communal education of children. 6. Abolition of all religion.
These 6 points were extremely similar to the planks of communism, but we'll be getting back to that later.
His plan was the most thorough and deceptive ever seen in the world. Those sworn into the order were sworn to secrecy under pain of death from all of the other members.
Webster said,
A great point impressed upon the adepts, of which we shall see the importance later, was that they should not be known as Illuminati.
So even members of the Illuminati were not referring to themselves as Illuminati.
Sounds like a twisted version of Fight Club. Their welcoming of new members always had a strategy. Weissepp took a great interest in women members, for instance. They would prey on already present sentiments by giving them what he called hints of emancipation.
Weissepp said,
More or less, they can all be led towards change by vanity, curiosity, sensuality, and inclination. From this, one can draw much profit for the good cause.
They even split the female members into 2 groups. One was virtuous women, who would lend an impression of good repute to the order, and the other was what he called light women, who would basically just satisfy members who have a penchant for pleasure.
how brilliant their plan is can be seen in the way they treated individuals with money. They called them fools with money. Weissepp said in a letter,
These good people swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait. But let us beware of telling them our secrets. This sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last.
Weissepp had weaponized intrigue.
The significance of the other secret societies cannot be overemphasized here because Weissepp's plan was to alter the fabric of the world, to destroy everything that civilization had brought into existence. And to do that, he saw strength in a merger between societies. This would infiltrate the elite, most of whom could be found in one of the above-mentioned groups.
Within 2 years of founding the Illumidonkey, Weissepp became a Freemason, and using the intrigue of his secrets, slowly word and more approval came for uniting these societies. As a Freemason, he met an extremely ambitious Mason named Adolf Friernick. Weissepp revealed his plans to Nick and is known for saying that with 6 men like Nick, he would be able to take over the world.
It's very important that we explain this next part to you because it's critical. During this time, there were several things happening in society. Between 1781 and 1782, there were many books and writings written exonerating the Jews and forcing people to question their sentiment towards them.
You have to understand there's a reason we're bringing this up. Jewish folk at the time were not looked well upon. And while we don't personally agree with looking down on anyone at the time for many weird reasons, some even going back as far as Jesus, it was something that had been an issue. This part will make sense in a moment.
It was at this moment, with Nigg's help, that an assembly of the heads of these 2 societies of Freemasons and the Illumidonkey were brought together in one place. A small company of Jews were also in attendance at this conference.
And something happened that can be considered one of the most important meetings in the history of our civilization, the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. Heard of it?
Neither did we. It was at this meeting that a most organized plan was revealed by the Bavarian Illuminati to members of the other order. Using intrigue and the desires already present in other men, the plot in the dark took hold.
Keep in mind that not everyone a part of this conference was bad. Some men, upon hearing of the plan of the New World Order, could not in good faith continue on with those groups.
Webster outlines what François-Henri Devereux stated after the conference by a quote from him in his biographer.
The conspiracy which is being woven is so well thought out that it will be, so to speak, impossible for the monarchy and the church to escape from it.
From this time onwards, says his biographer, M. Costa de Beauregard,
the Comte de Devereux could only speak of Freemasonry with horror.
And henceforth, from this meeting, it was the Illuminized group that took the lead in their future amalgamated form. It was also agreed that moving forward, Jews would be allowed into these lodges moving forward.
Many decisions were made as the plan was revealed. The headquarters of the Illuminized Freemasonry would move to Frankfurt. Now, why is this important?
What's called the Jewish finance stronghold was based in Frankfurt. That might not seem scary until you start tracking the names who were a part of those in charge. Enter Meyer Amschel Rothschild, Oppenheimer, Wertheimer, Schuster, Speyer, Stern, and more. The first two may sound strangely familiar to you. Oh my God, mind blown. Who was pulling the strings here?
If this weren't enough, at the time of these changes, the numbers of members of these combined societies equaled a whopping 3 million people.
Connecting all of these Freemasonry lodges with the Illuminati as assisted by NIG was essential for Weissapp's plan. Weissapp put the heads of his order in charge of many strategic branches to aid in the carrying out of his plan.
You might be asking, well guys, how do these secret societies have anything to do directly with communism? According to what we found, they were critical in its development. Here's what Nesta Webster said about them.
The organization of the secret societies was needed to transform the theorizings of the philosophers into a concrete and formidable system for the destruction of civilization.
The work of Weissapp was not complete even after the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. The Grand Orient and Martinistes were not yet completely Illuminized.
So as to not bore you to death with the names that fit outside the scope of this episode, we'll simply explain that they were eventually infiltrated by Illuminizing specific people in their orders and getting them a part of the plan, and then utilizing them sometimes without those secret societies even knowing.
The unity of these secret societies was just the start. Without a plot in the dark or from the shadows, those things intending to happen on the surface could never have been accomplished.
Anytime there was a task too hard to handle for the sake of the revolution, more men in the way or with power were infiltrated and Illuminized.
Literally, every big player leading up to the French Revolution was in some way connected to the Illuminati or the Illuminized Freemasonry.
Why is this important? Webster says,
hitherto, the isolated revolutions that had taken place throughout the history of the world can be clearly recognized as spontaneous movements brought about by oppression or by a political faction enjoying some measure of popular support, and therefore endeavoring to satisfy the demands of the people. But in the French Revolution, we see for the first time that plan in operation which has been carried on right up to the present moment, the systematic attempt to create grievances in order to exploit them.
We'll give you perhaps the best example of how engineered agitation worked in real time during the early stages of the French Revolution. This historical incident was called the Great Fear.
At a time just before the French Revolution, there were rumors everywhere of a famine plot, a conspiracy that aristocrats were staging planned burning of grain and farmland to starve out the population.
At almost the same hour across towns and villages in France, a panic was instigated by urgent messengers on horseback bearing signs that said, "Edict of the King," telling commoners that terrorists were coming to, we assume, to burn those fields and to arm themselves.
The king orders all chateaux to be burned down. He only wishes to keep his own.
These people, already agitated, thought they were now given a message from the king to carry out their violence against the actual laws that the king would never break. Their wish was fulfilled to burn down the chateaux of the aristocracy.
Webster said,
The object of the conspirators was thus achieved, the arming of the populace against law and order, a device which ever since 1789 has always formed the first item in the program of the social revolution.
So you might be asking who this brilliant agitation plan was devised by. None other than Adrien Dupont. an adept of Illuminized Freemasonry.
Holy cow! So now we have 2 names from the 13 families appearing here behind these catastrophic world events, right?
Coincidence? In our last episode, we quoted Fritz Springmeier about the idea where communism came and who funded it. Here's a quote from None Dare to Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen on page 25.
Karl Marx was hired by a mysterious group who called themselves the League of the Just Men to write the Communist Manifesto as demagogic bootbait to appeal to the mob. In actual fact, the Communist Manifesto was in circulation for many years before Marx's name was widely enough recognized to establish his authorship for this revolutionary handbook. All Karl Marx really did was update and codify the very same revolutionary plans and principles set down 70 years earlier by Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Order of the Illuminati in Bavaria. And it is widely acknowledged by serious scholars of this subject that the League of the Just Men was simply an extension of the Illuminati, which was forced to go underground after it was exposed by a raid in 1786 conducted by the Bavarian authorities.
Oh my gosh.
That's correct. The proof of conspiracy can not only be found in the actions of those involved or the connections, but also in their words. We're going to read a quote from Marx and Engels. Some of the names won't make sense because we didn't cover it, but we want you to pay close attention.
The revolutionary movement, which began in 1789 with Cercle Social, whose main representatives were to be Leclerc and Roux, and which ended in Babeuf's conspiracy, gave birth to the communist idea, which Filippo Buonarroti, a friend of Babeuf, reintroduced into France after the Revolution of 1830. This idea, consistently developed, is the idea of the New World Order.
Boom.
Yeah.
Let's wrap this mind-blowing episode up. Communism isn't what it seems on the surface. There were many plans in place to create the specter haunting our world, and as always, we're just finding out what we can and presenting it to all of you to be the judges.
As for secret societies, it seems the situation is abundantly laid clear now. While there may be lodges of Freemasonry that are still good, and while there may be still men in Freemasonry that are good across the world, there is no way those good men would know about the intentions of those above at a higher degree.
It's clear here that Freemasonry in Britain and the Americas were different than those in France and Germany after Weishaupt's infiltration. But it's also clear that Freemasonry in general is all connected.
That master conspirator, Adam Weishaupt, said,
G is grace. The flaming star is the torch of reason. Those who possess this knowledge are indeed Illuminati.
So it is the G in Freemasonry that now carries on this proverbial torch of Illuminism in plain sight, just as Lucifer is the light bearer? What secrets do those lodges have about the world history we reviewed on this episode?
I guess we'll have to find out if we all keep asking the right questions.
That's right, everyone. We'll be asking those questions out on the edge
Of wonder.
Let me try to do this. The fiddler, how so I plunge without fail, my blood black saber into your soul, till senses reel.
I felt like Gollum was reading that. You totally channeled Gollum.